Cinematic storytelling, gradual build-up, warm yet slightly ironic. Begin with intrigue, peak with satire, and end on a soft, meditative note. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where everything, and I mean everything, needed paperwork. You're standing at the gates of Constantinople, the crown jewel of the Byzantine Empire. Marble glints in torchlight, mosaics shimmer overhead, and somewhere in the air, the faint scent of hot wax and old parchment. Beyond these gates lies the sacred engine of the empire, not the army, not the church, but the ever-churning, paper-stuffed, signature-obsessed bureaucratic machine. You enter the great palace, not into a throne room, not into a war council, but into the imperial chancery, the office where things get written down. The scent hits you first: dust, candle wax, dried ink, and something left in the corner 3 reigns ago. Scrolls, codices, ledgers, so old, you swear they might curse you if opened. You're not here to conquer, not to rule. You're here to witness the sacred dance of the Byzantine paperwork. Clerks in robes hunch over desks, dipping quills into needle-based ink. Some whisper, some sigh dramatically. One is asleep upright, his fingers still twitching at script. In this empire, it's not who you know, it's who has stamped your form. Documents flow like rivers, tax receipts, ceremonial titles. Letters between monks arguing about fish, each must be checked, copied, sealed, and sometimes, if it's a Tuesday, sung aloud. Because Byzantines never met a rule they couldn't make extra. You sit on a wooden bench watching a man in golden trim teach the sacred art of unrolling a scroll just enough to show the emperor's signature without creasing it. That takes a year to learn. First rule of Byzantine paperwork: presentation over practicality. Always. So, before you get comfortable, like the video. Subscribe if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk the corridors of the Great Palace's back offices, each quieter, scroll-filled, and somehow dustier than the last. One clerk nods, hands you honeyed wine, then returns to cross-referencing decrees from 200 years ago. He looks so tired. Here's a truth they don't teach in history class. While generals conquered and emperors posed for mosaics, it was the scribes, those ink-stained sleepwalkers, who actually kept the empire going. Every tax, every bishop, every noble with too many domes, all passed through your first. Byzantine bureaucracy was legendary, precise, but painfully slow. You think the DMV is bad? Try requesting a land deed here. First, handwritten in triplicate on purple parchment if you're important. Then, copied by a scribe who only works Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then reviewed by the Grand Logothete, basically a royal label maker with a crown, who changes one word and sends it back. 3 weeks later, it hits the Imperial Secretariat, where it's shelved behind a stack labeled, "Pending since last emperor." And that's if it goes smoothly. You hear the scratch of quills. An archivist mutters about margins, another sorts ribbon seals by mood color. Yes, Byzantines did that. Some documents were never meant to be read, just wrapped in silk, paraded, then forgotten. A land grant for a noble who's been dead 5 years still needs a stamp. A decree for a river that dried up? 6 wax seals, 2 witnesses at an ornate desk. The scribe dips his quill into gold ink. He's writing a crucible, a golden seal of imperial edict. You peek. 7 in the name of our most serene majesty, each more dramatic than the last. He sighs. He's going to want it rewritten with more adjectives. You smile. You're not storming castles tonight, not crossing deserts. You're in a room lit by fading candles, surrounded by parchment, ink, and a bureaucracy so overdone, it becomes oddly relaxing. Let the ink dry. Let the wax cool. There's no rush here. Not in the empire of paperwork. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where everything, and I mean everything, needed paperwork. You're standing at the gates of Constantinople, the crown jewel of the Byzantine Empire. Marble glints in torchlight, mosaics shimmer overhead, and somewhere in the air, the faint scent of hot wax and old parchment. Beyond these gates lies the sacred engine of the empire, not the army, not the church, but the ever-churning, paper-stuffed, signature-obsessed bureaucratic machine. You enter the Great Palace, not into a throne room, not into a war council, but into the Imperial Chancery. The office where things get written down. The scent hits you first: dust, candle wax, dried ink, and something left in the corner 3 reigns ago. Scrolls, codices, ledgers. So old, you swear they might curse you if opened. You're not here to conquer, not to rule. You're here to witness the sacred dance of Byzantine paperwork. Clerks in robes hunch over desks, dipping quills into beetle-based ink. Some whisper, some sigh dramatically. One is asleep upright, his fingers still twitching in script. In this empire, it's not who you know, it's who has stamped your form. Documents flow like rivers, tax receipts, ceremonial titles, letters between monks arguing about fish. Each must be checked, copied, sealed, and sometimes, if it's a Tuesday, sung aloud. Because Byzantines never met a rule. They couldn't make extra. You sit on a wooden bench, watching a man in golden trim teach the sacred art of unrolling a scroll just enough to show the emperor's signature, without creasing it. That takes a year to learn. First rule of Byzantine paperwork: presentation over practicality. Always. So before you get comfortable, like the video. Subscribe if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk the corridors of the Great Palace's back offices, each quieter, scroll-filled, and somehow dustier than the last. One clerk nods, hands you honeyed wine, then returns to cross-referencing decrees from 200 years ago. He looks so tired. Here's a truth they don't teach in history class. While generals conquered and emperors posed for mosaics, it was the scribes, those ink-stained sleepwalkers, who actually kept the empire going. Every tax, every bishop, every noble with too many domes, all passed through here first. Byzantine bureaucracy was legendary, precise, but painfully slow. You think the DMV is bad? Try requesting a land deed here. First, handwritten in triplicate on purple parchment if you're important. Then, copied by a scribe who only works Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then reviewed by the Grand Lobithate, basically a royal label maker with a crown, who changes one word and sends it back. 3 weeks later, it hits the Imperial Secretariat, where its shell kind of stack labeled pending since last emperor, and that's if it goes smoothly. You hear the scratch of quills. An archivist mutters about margins. Another sorts ribbon seals by mood color. Yes, Byzantines did that. Some documents were never meant to be read, just wrapped in silk, paraded, then forgotten. A land grant for a noble who's been dead 5 years still needs a stamp. A decree for a river that dried up, 6 wax seals, 2 witnesses. At an ornate desk, a scribe dips his quill into gold ink. He's writing a crucible, the golden sealed imperial edict. You peek 7 in the name of our most serene majesty. Each more dramatic than the last. He sighs. He's going to want it rewritten, with more adjectives. You smile. You're not storming castles tonight, not crossing deserts. You're in a room lit by fading candles, surrounded by parchment, ink, and a bureaucracy so overdone it becomes oddly relaxing. Let the ink dry, let the wax cool. There's no rush here, not in the empire of paperwork. You're back at your desk, or rather, Nikitas's desk, which you've slowly claimed a corner of. He doesn't seem to mind. You've proven yourself semi-useful by organizing ribbon spools in chromatic order, and for that noble service, you've been rewarded with a nib pen of your very own. It doesn't write well, and it smells like goose, but it's a start. Today, the office is buzzing. Well, buzzing in the Byzantine sense. 2 people are whispering slightly louder than usual, and someone dropped a scroll. Chaos. The reason for this surge of excitement? A new decree is being prepared for the emperor's signature. Now, in a modern world, you might imagine this is simple. Type it up, big boss signs it, done. But here, oh no, in Byzantium, a signature is not a formality, it's a ritual. Nikitas leans in. An emperor's signature isn't just ink, he whispers. It's power, sanctified, divine right on parchment. You nod, solemnly, pretending you understand, for then 3 clerks arrive, carrying the emperor's pen cushion. It gets its own chair, with tassels. The document itself must be reviewed by no fewer than 4 departments. Language, titles, land borders, and yes, font aesthetics. Some say this scrutiny was to ensure accuracy, others say it was ceremonial. Most quietly agree it was an institutionalized form of procrastination. But by the time a document was signed, the people who requested it had often forgotten it existed. Eventually, the decree is ready. You're ushered into the signature room. It smells of incense and expectation. The emperor, he won't sign it himself. That task belongs to the mystikos, his personal secretary, the man who channels imperial will through the sacred act of authorizing things. Clad in silvery robes and a mildly bored expression, he applies the menologium. It looks less like a name and more like a squashed peacock with a mustache. Flourished in gold ink, stamped with the imperial ring, then swiftly taken to be recopied by 3 other scribes who don't trust his spelling. This is standard. The decree is read aloud twice, once in formal court dialect, once in simplified court speak, which mostly adds dramatic pauses and syllables like this. There is polite applause. A man in the corner cries, from joy or allergies, no one's sure. Then, the seals, wax seals, lead seals, ribbon seals, each with its own protocol. Some are pressed with warm iron, others with cold bronze chilled in monk-blessed water. You're invited to try one. You press the seal into soft wax, a fig-colored blob. It squelches slightly. You feel important. Nikitas leans over. That's the backup copy. Ah. Naturally, the most sacred documents receive the chrysoberyl, not solid gold, but the lettering is gold, the parchment dyed imperial purple. The dye, so rare it can only be prepared when the moon is waxing and the dye master has fasted for 3 days, or so the rumor goes. In the golden cabinet, these are stored until monks softly chant and unwrap them. You peek inside, it smells like lavender and old coins. One chrysoberyl is addressed to a Bulgarian prince. Another to a monastery that, as Nikitas mutters, probably doesn't even exist anymore. But the documents remain. Unsigned papers can be ignored. Signed ones must be honored, in theory. Some scribes spend their entire careers on documents that never leave the building. One scribe, old as bark, eyes like glass, says, "I've worked on 27 decrees about land disputes. Not one left this office, but they were beautiful." You believe him. You begin to wonder how much power rests in a signature. Here it's more than proof, it is power. A signature that can move armies, build churches, pardon criminals, and once grant a fisherman exclusive rights to a river that turned out to be a very large puddle. As your day winds down, you help drive freshly signed scrolls on a rack that looks suspiciously like a laundry line. Wax, ink, aroma of old authority. Candlelight flickers across delicate lettering. You rest your hands. Somewhere a clerk mutters about ribbon thickness again. Close your eyes and picture the emperor's seal. Round, golden, terribly slow, but perfect. You don't realize how late it's gotten until Nikitas gestures at the shadow creeping across your stack of parchment. "Time for the candle tax," he says, only half joking. The office, it seems, keeps track of wax consumption like it's imperial gold, which, considering how expensive beeswax is these days, might not be far off. You stay seated anyway. The work is far from done. Tonight's task? Making exact copies of already signed decrees. That's right, even after all the pomp, flair, and squashed peacock-style signatures, the Byzantines weren't content with just one copy. Each important document had to be duplicated, triplicated, sometimes quintuplicated by hand, and every version had to be identical, right down to the ornate loops of the letter kappa. Nikitas taps the top of a scroll with his gold-trimmed pen and says, "Imagine writing the same thing 6 times, and if you make one mistake, you start over." You nod solemnly. You've just watched someone get reassigned to chicken feather inventory duty over a smudged margin. Harsh but, as Nikitas would say, a necessary sacrifice to the gods of legibility. You pick up your pen and begin your first duplicate. Slowly, carefully, with the hands of a person copying Holy Scripture and the anxiety of someone filling out a tax form by candlelight. As you write, you get a better feel for the texture of the parchment. Sheep's skin, smooth to a glossy finish, it squeaks faintly under your pen. You learn to avoid the oily spots, the faint scars, and the places where the dye pooled unevenly. Your fingers stain with ink that will not wash out for days. You feel honored and slightly damp. Nikitas oversees your work with surprising patience. Most newcomers can't even spell Constantinople by the 3rd hour, he mutters. You beam. It only took you 2. But there's a secret to this part of the bureaucracy, and it's not just about good handwriting, it's about preservation. These documents are meant to last. Every loop of ink, Every colored seal, every velvet ribbon is a line thrown out into the future, hoping someone, centuries from now, might still read it. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines were obsessed with record-keeping because of genuine foresight, or because they distrusted everyone within a 5-kilometer radius. Either way, their written legacy outlived their empire. The Ottomans later marveled at the Byzantine record rooms so full of scrolls that some clerks had to climb ladders just to find the right one. And sometimes by the time they found it, the empire had already changed its mind. Midway through your third copy, an older scribe offers you a sweet. It's a fig stuffed with pine nuts and dipped in what he calls honey, aged by monks. You accept it gratefully, then realize it's mostly beeswax. You eat it anyway. This is your life now. Your candle flickers. The air smells of old wool and ink and faintly lavender from the scrolls stored near the archbishop's desk. You look around the office and see others deep in the same trance, bent over their pages, copying by hand, building the paper spine of an empire that never hurries. There's something oddly comforting in the slowness. It's like embroidery for the mind. Every line, a stitch. Every paragraph, a pattern. Time stretches and your breathing slows with it. Across the room, 2 scribes are quietly debating the correct format for a copy being sent to Armenia. Should the salutation include the title "Beloved Cousin of Rome"? One says yes, one says no. A third arrives with a precedent scroll from 72 years ago. The answer depends on the weather that year. You continue copying, letting the words blur into rhythm. Occasionally, you swap scrolls with a partner who double-checks your work. One mistake spotted, a rogue semicolon pretending to be a holy flourish, and you're back to square one. It's fine. You kind of like square one now. Some of the scrolls being copied tonight are headed for distant provinces. Cilicia, Trebizond, even a small fishing village where the governor has apparently requested a reminder of his exact job description. You wonder what it's like to receive a decree from Constantinople. Does it arrive with trumpets? Or just a tired messenger muttering, "Please sign for this"? You finish your last duplicate just as the wax pool on your candle threatens to spill over. Nikitas inspects your work, then with a rare smile stamps it with his minor seal. A little fish holding a scroll in its mouth. "Approved," he says, very fish-like. You're starting to get the hang of this. Before you sleep, one more ritual. Scroll storage. These aren't just tossed into baskets. Oh no. Each scroll has a designated rack, color-coded ribbon, and must be gently wrapped in linen treated with clove oil to keep bugs away. It smells like a spice market, and a library had a very polite baby. As you help stack the scrolls in their resting places, you catch sight of one wrapped in deep green ribbon. You ask what it is. Nikitas leans in and whispers, a tax code revision that's been in circulation since Emperor Heraclius. No one dares remove it. It's oddly comforting. Empires may rise and fall, but misplaced tax paperwork, eternal. The lights dim further. The scribes begin drifting to their sleeping alcoves. Some stay up a bit longer to polish pens or argue about how to abbreviate strategos of the Western themes without offending any current strategoi. You lie back on your borrowed cushion and close your eyes, the echo of quills still humming in your ears. Maybe tomorrow you'll get to hold the seal stamper again. If you're lucky. If no one else smudges anything. You wake not to an alarm, but to the gentle rustle of parchment and the unmistakable scrape of quill on skin. Vellum skin, that is. The chancery never really sleeps. It naps and shifts, sighs in candlelight, and murmurs itself awake with bureaucratic dreams. Nikitas is already up, sipping something dark and herbal from a lopsided ceramic mug. Mint, he explains, and desperation. Today's assignment is less glamorous, though in Byzantine terms, that simply means you're not dealing with purple ink or golden seals. You've been tasked with updating titles and honorifics in the imperial ledger, a record so vast it requires 3 separate scroll racks and its own librarian, who goes by Gregory the Modestly Important. Your job: cross-reference the official honorifics of every surviving bureaucrat, general, bishop, provincial governor, and anyone else who might, on a particularly sunny day, be referred to as illustrious. You begin by unrolling scrolls thicker than your thigh. They smell like toasted walnuts in tax season. Each name is followed by a paragraph of flowing Greek text, most of which consists of synonyms for very, very powerful or gloriously adjacent to someone important. Nikitas watches you as you squint over a listing for a man named Basileos of Adrianople. He used to be illuminated patriarchal envoy, Nikitas says, tapping the parchment. But he fell out with the logothete of the herds. You blink. There's a logothete of the herds. Oh yes, he says, sipping. Cows are surprisingly political. You cross out illuminated and replace it with lesser affiliated, a downgrade so subtle only 10 people on Earth would notice, but all of them would be furious. Titles matter in Byzantium. They're not just words, they're currency. There are entire offices devoted to inventing new titles just so no one's feelings get hurt. Magistros, Sebastocrator, Protospatharios, Chartularios to Kanacleo. By the time you've written them 3 times each, you can barely see straight. Historians still argue whether these titles actually denoted real power or were more like bureaucratic participation trophies. One famous joke among scribes: 2 Sebastocrators walk into a room. Neither is allowed to speak until the third one arrives. You pause your quill to rest your hand. Gregory the modestly important strolls past, humming an off-key hymn. He notices your scroll and says, "Ah, the title revision list. Did you remember to check if anyone was deposed yesterday?" You blink. "Yesterday?" He nods. "We try to stay current. That's why we have a spy in every monastery and a pigeon in every governor's pocket." You're not sure if he's joking. Lunchtime brings a plate of stewed lentils and a piece of barley bread hard enough to qualify as a defensive weapon. You dip it in olive oil to soften it, but mostly succeed in making your fingers taste like salad. As you eat, you hear 2 younger scribes arguing about whether a minor noble in Cappadocia should be listed as blessed by association or simply semi-esteemed. The difference? About 600 drachmas in annual tax exemptions. Back at your desk, you return to the Great Ledger, where a certain Theodora is now apparently married to a different strategos than she was 2 weeks ago. Nikitas raises an eyebrow. Scandal, or just a bad scribe last time? You flip through older scrolls. The handwriting changes halfway through. "Ah," he says. Scribe number 12, he had creative interpretations of marriage law. Some days, this is what the Byzantine Empire runs on. Not armies or theology, but little updates and titles that ripple through the administrative ecosystem like spilled ink. You're nearly finished when a courier bursts in, waving a fresh update from the Imperial Palace. Apparently, a former military commander has now been named Honorary Shield Bearer of the Household Guard, 3rd Class. You pause. What does that mean? Nikitas shrugs. It means he did something mildly useful, and someone owed him a favor. Also, it comes with a sash. You dutifully record it. The sash gets its own line. As the candles are relit and your ink pot is refilled with an unsettling squelch, you update the final entries for the day. 1 noble is stripped of the title Advisor of the Olive Harvest after a failed crop. Another is promoted to Grand Defender of the City Walls, retired. Yes, even retirees get honorifics. A curious entry catches your eye. An anonymous official only listed as he who carries the imperial slippers. No name, no rank, just the title. You ask about it. Nikitas leans close and whispers, "He's real. No one knows who he is, but the slippers arrive warm every morning." You blink slowly. The implications are terrifying. You finish the day by carefully inking your updates into the master scroll, then rolling it tight and securing it with a loop of crimson ribbon, the color reserved for title documentation. The ribbon alone is worth more than your sandals. The scroll is handed off to Gregory, who nods solemnly and places it in the 2nd rack from the top, 3rd shelf to the left. You'll remember that. Or you'll get lost in scroll purgatory. As you finally sit back, rubbing the cramp from your wrist, Nikitas pats your shoulder. "Well done. Tomorrow, we reassign clerks who misuse the title Most Excellent." You nod, your head swimming with prefixes. Sleep comes quickly when your dreams are filled with velvet sashes and the faint scent of sandalwood ink. The next day begins not with a rooster's crow but with a soft knock and the sound of someone dropping a scroll, followed by several quieter scrolls falling in protest. You stir beneath your thin linen blanket and probably recall today's assignment, signature protocol. Nikitas greets you with a grin far too wide for this hour. "Hope you've had your fill of sleep," he says. "Today we're practicing how to not offend half the empire with a signature." You stretch your arms and follow him to the long wooden table known only half-jokingly as the forgiveness bench.
This is where scribes go to master the complex and utterly Byzantine art of formal signing. You sit down in front of a stack of documents, a tray of signature samples, and, curiously, a ruler. Not for drawing lines, Nikita says, tapping the ruler, for measuring flair. See, in the Byzantine court, signing a document isn't just functional, it's a miniature performance. The name must appear in precisely the right size, ink, and flourish ratio. Too humble, and it's an insult to your office. Too bold, and you might be accused of ambition. The stakes, high. The speed, glacial. Your first trial is to sign a name you've never heard of. Demetrius, Archon of the Sweetwater District. You try your best, swirling the final sigma like a sleepy snail. Nikita's frowns. That swirl looks thirsty, he says. Give it a little more ambition, but not too much. We don't want Demetrios to think he's invited to the Emperor's table. You adjust accordingly. Nikitas nods. Better. That's a swirl that says, I know my place, but I'm not afraid of a promotion. Throughout the morning, you practice signature formatting for a variety of titles. Generals, tax officers, monastery treasurers, and one inexplicable entry labeled Guardian of the Moonlight Lamps. You suspect that's ceremonial, or made up during a wine-heavy banquet. One particular signature, the Emperor's, requires its own pen. It's a long, feathered affair dipped in crushed lapis lazuli ink. You are not allowed to touch this pen. You are only allowed to look at it from a respectful distance and whisper, wow. Historians still argue whether the Emperor himself ever signed anything, or if his Canacleos, the imperial inkstand keeper, just mastered a very convincing flourish. One Byzantine scholar claimed the Emperor's hand was far too elevated for menial gestures like signing. Nikitas shares this tidbit as he demonstrates the proper way to blot a signature using a square of linen and a gently murmured prayer. The prayer, he insists, doesn't do anything, it's just tradition. Plus, he adds, it makes the blot feel special. After midday prayers, a clerk from the eastern provinces arrives with a packet of unsigned decrees. You're tasked with preparing the margins for their upcoming signatures. This involves drawing tiny guide marks with a stylus that will later be erased. Each one must be exactly the same distance from the edge. You ask, why? Because once, a margin was too wide and a bishop took it as a personal insult. Nikita says, sighing. That started the great stationary dispute of 832. The rest of the office nods solemnly. That was apparently a thing. The documents signed today are destined for many corners of the empire. Some head to Antioch, others to Dalmatia, and one particularly fancy packet is bound for a princess in Trebizond. That one gets the red ink, a color used only for correspondence with royalty and, according to legend, for breaking up with hostile provinces. You take a break and wander the storage alcove where discarded signature drafts are kept. It's like a signature graveyard. One scroll is filled entirely with practice sigmas, each one sadder than the last. Another contains an official's name written 50 times, growing gradually more chaotic, until the final attempt just says, off. Back at your desk, you're introduced to the final step in signature protocol. Seal placement. This is not done willy-nilly. Oh no. The seal must sit below and slightly to the right of the signature. Unless it's a vertical scroll, then it sits above, unless the sender is outranked by the recipient, in which case it must float near the bottom in a slightly self-deprecating way. It's a lot. Nikita sees your face and chuckles. You know how we say the empire runs on wine and prayer? Actually, it runs on seal etiquette. You nod solemnly and receive your practice seal. A small, worn stamp depicting a goat eating a fig. It's supposed to represent humble service. You imprint it on a test scroll, gently press, and lift. Perfect, you've got the hand for this, Nikita says. I think you're ready for the salt permits. And just like that, you're promoted to signing off on the Empire's salt distributions. A humble task, but important. Without salt, there's no preserved fish, no seasoned bread, and no reason for the coastal provinces to pay their harbor fees. You sign the name of a minor bureaucrat from Thessaloniki, flick a gentle tail on the final letter, and add your goat seal. The scroll is rolled, tied with twine, and handed off to a runner who vanishes into the night like a particularly polite ghost. As the candle flickers lower and the scent of wax fills your nose, you realize your signature now lives somewhere in the Imperial archives. Probably on shelf D, under slightly salted. You feel weirdly proud. Exhausted. Ink-stained, but proud.
Nikitas pats your shoulder and says, "Get some rest. Tomorrow we tackle the imperial thank you notes." And so you drift to sleep, dreaming of peacocks, parchment, and a goat named Fig. You wake to the sound of someone humming a hymn and the soft, unmistakable crinkle of vellum being unrolled. Outside your tiny window, the sun is barely thinking about rising. Inside, it smells faintly of rosewater ink and damp sandals. Nikitas enters the scriptorium with a look of determined patience. "Today," he says with the solemnity of a man preparing you for battle, "we're composing imperial thank you notes." You blink. "Who are we thanking?" He raises a brow. "Everyone, all the time. For everything." See, in the Byzantine Empire, the thank you note is not just a polite gesture, it's a geopolitical instrument. The emperor, of course, never writes these himself. That honor falls to mid-tier scribes with excellent penmanship and unshakable patience, which as of yesterday includes you. Your desk is already arranged with a stack of thin parchment squares and a fresh bottle of the empire's finest indigo ink, harvested from the murex snail and worth more than your sandals. Your first task? Thank the governor of Cyprus for sending 24 amphorae of olive oil. Be warm, but not too warm. Nikitas advises we want him to feel appreciated, but not empowered. You carefully draft, "Most noble Strategos Theodoros, the golden city shines brighter with your generous offering. May your groves never wither, nor your ships run aground." Nikitas peers over your shoulder. Good, but lose the part about ships. His brother died in a boat accident. You wince and revise. The rest of the morning is a parade of obscure dignitaries and increasingly niche offerings. A bishop in Sinope has sent an embroidered sock. A minor aristocrat near the Armenian frontier has gifted a goose trained to bow on command. And one particularly confident wine merchant has included a poem about how the emperor's beard reminds him of Mount Olympus. That one gets no reply, Nikitas mutters. One scroll catches your eye. It's a thank you note to a Nubian envoy who delivered several crates of incense and something labeled elephant wisdom. Historians still argue whether this was an idiom, a mistranslation, or an actual elephant. You copy the pre-written thank you message in carefully practiced hand. To the esteemed emissary of Alodia, the incense dances in our halls like your people's kindness. The wisdom, tusked or otherwise, is treasured beyond words. Nikitas nods. Perfect. Mystical, yet vague. Just enough sincerity to keep us allies. The afternoon brings more curious thank you requests, each one more obscure than the last. You thank a monastery for inventing a new method of drying plums. You thank a retired general for donating a silver spoon shaped like a sea urchin. You even draft a note to a 12-year-old boy in Epirus who mailed a drawing of the emperor riding a dragon. Your reply is signed by His Imperial Smile. Not all notes are easy. One tricky case involves a gift from a rebellious governor who may or may not be plotting to declare himself semi-independent. Nikitas gives you the assignment. We need to acknowledge the gift, while reminding him who signs his tax exemptions. You try. To the Right Honorable Leontius, your offering is noted with respectful gratitude. May your service remain as loyal as your gift is ornate. Nikitas leans in, reads it twice, then grins. That's the literary equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Well done. As the sun dips behind the city's domes, you're tasked with adding one final note to a batch heading east. It's for a Persian poet who sent a book of riddles and a cake shaped like a horse. The message? Your wit confounds us, your cake feeds us. Both are received with delight and caution. At last, as the candles are lit and the city quiets down, you help roll the completed notes into scrolls, tie them with colored thread, blue for nobility, green for clergy, red for foreign allies, and place them in dispatch baskets. You watch a sleepy-eyed courier hoist the wicker crate onto his back and vanish into the dusk. Somewhere, far away, your thank you notes will flutter open in distant courts and lonely towers, bearing your careful script and carefully curated flattery. You think about how entire political relationships hinge on tone, flourish, and a well-placed metaphor about figs. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's Byzantine. And as you blow out the final candle, you imagine your words traveling down the Silk Roads, crossing deserts, passing through hands you'll never meet. All because a bishop somewhere decided to send a really nice sock. You've only just settled into your routine. Scrolls, ink, passive-aggressive politeness, when Nikitas informs you that today you'll be visiting the Office of Titles. The Office of what? you ask. The place where names go to get unnecessarily longer, he replies, already halfway out the door. The Office of Titles sits in a quieter wing of the palace complex, tucked between the Imperial Archivum and the small garden where someone grows precisely 2 fig trees under armed guard. It's a hushed, paper-scented place where officials whisper and bow, mostly to themselves. Here, every person's name, from the Emperor down to the Empire's official candlewick inspector, comes with a title. Sometimes a dozen titles, each one more florid than the last. And it's your job to help copy and maintain the official registry of honorifics. You're handed a massive codex bound in dark leather, its pages already filled with ornate, looping handwriting. Nikitas points to a name: Stephanos Doukas, Imperial Cub-bearer, holder of the Azure Tassel, 5th singer to the Chapel of the Peacock, one-time judge of the Cinnamon Dispute, patron of moderate feasting. You raise your eyebrows. Nikitas only shrugs. He once resolved a quarrel between 2 chefs over cinnamon ratios. It became a minor feast day. And so, you begin your work. Every time a person's status changes, say they earn a new honor or are demoted due to excessive spillage at a banquet, their title is updated. This involves tracing over their name with gold-tinged ink using a script that must taper at the ends, like a goose feather left out in rain. You practice the signature loops, which resemble both tiny spirals and emotionally exhausted snails. One of your first entries is a woman named Eudokia, recently elevated to Mistress of the Night Lanterns. No one seems to know what she does, but she's very well respected. Your job is to add the phrase, "Who holds the ever-steady flame?" Too flowery, you ask. Perfectly flowery, Nikitas replies. If anything, not flowery enough. You soon learn that the Byzantines have titles for everything. There's an official snuffer of incense wicks. There's a deputy warden of breakfast delays. There's even a man whose full title, when unrolled, requires 2 scrolls and an elbow assist. Historians still argue whether many of these roles had real duties or were invented to reward loyalty without handing out land or money. Some believe the system was a deliberate maze. By the time you finished reading someone's credentials, your original complaint had either resolved itself or you'd forgotten what it was. Mid-morning, you witness a title dispute firsthand. 2 men argue over who holds the more senior version of Guardian of Imperial Carpets. One claims the prefix pro gives him supremacy. The other says high is more prestigious. Nikitas intervenes with all the tact of a weary diplomat. Gentlemen will simply add a footnote to both titles stating that seniority is context-dependent and subject to hallway deference. Both nod, somewhat satisfied. In the corner, a boy of about 10 is being quizzed on ceremonial titles for his upcoming page roll. He dutifully recites, "I am to be junior keeper of the Emperor's evening cloak and emergency cushion." You applaud softly. He bows. Your afternoon task involves updating the honorifics for a recently deceased noblewoman. Because she lived to the age of 94, her title must be lengthened in memoriam. It now includes, "She who outlived 3 emperors." Unyielding in card games, her laugh was known to frighten cats. When you ask if that last part is appropriate, Nikita shrugs. It was well documented. Toward dusk, you're handed a fresh promotion decree. It's for a monk who invented a new method of illuminating manuscripts using crushed beetle shells and moonlight. His new title? Monk Gregorios, illuminator of gentle brilliance, friend to beetles, scribe of the soft clover. Copy the title onto fine parchment with soft purple ink, and watching the lines shimmer slightly as the light fades. Somewhere between poetic nonsense and bureaucratic necessity, you begin to understand the purpose of all this. These titles weren't just ways to elevate people. They were acts of storytelling, small narratives embroidered into the very names people carried. One person could be a steward of candles, a survivor of sieges, a father of 4, a known admirer of goat cheese, all fold into a single flowing title that might outlive them. It's a kind of immortality. Not the flashy kind with statues, but the soft, quiet kind preserved in ink. As you close the codex for the night, your fingers sore and smudged with gold dust, Nikitas claps a hand on your shoulder. "You've done well," he says. "Tomorrow we learn how to revoke a title without anyone noticing." You nod, exhausted but oddly comforted, and head off to bed, murmuring to yourself, Junior assistant to the humble scroll adjusters, ink steward in training, whisperer of margins. It has a nice ring to it. You wake to the sound of 3 different bells ringing at once, each one from a different office, announcing slightly different versions of the same thing. Tea is late. Nikitas doesn't seem concerned. They'll sort it out eventually, he mumbles, handing you a bundle of scrolls tied together with an aggressively knotted string. Today, we're visiting the Office of Time. You pause mid-yawn. We have an Office of Time? He nods. Of course we do. How else would anyone know when to panic? You follow him through twisting corridors to a quiet, sun-dappled room filled with water clocks, sundials, and one enormous sand timer the size of a small goat. The Office of Time is responsible for tracking, defining, and occasionally reinventing how hours work in the Byzantine Empire. The man who runs it, Magistros Dionysius, is thin, extremely precise, and constantly squinting at the ceiling as if it contains hidden schedules. He greets you without blinking. Do you know how long an hour is, he asks. You answer, 60 minutes. He shakes his head solemnly. Not always. See, in Byzantium, time was a flexible concept. Days were divided into 12 hours of daylight and 12 of night, regardless of season. That means daytime hours in summer were longer than those in winter, and nighttime hours did the reverse. You could have a 75-minute hour, Dionysius explains, or a 48-minute hour, depending on the sun. He gestures to a wax tablet with sliding hour markers. This keeps the monks honest. Historians still argue whether this elastic clock system was ingenious or completely unworkable. Monks would often ring bells to mark prayer hours, but travelers noted they'd hear the same bell at wildly different times, depending on the season, or the enthusiasm of the monk on duty. Your job today is to help recalibrate one of the water clocks, which works by dripping water through a narrow funnel into a basin marked with floating discs. Each disc is carved with an hour glyph, like a tiny soggy time oracle. You hold the funnel while Dionysius mutters calculations involving the angle of the sun, the moisture in the air, and the emperor's latest nap schedule. Nikitas helps by writing down numbers on parchment that seems to spontaneously curl from the humidity. At one point, a pigeon flaps through the open window and lands directly on the water clock. No one reacts. Add 10 minutes for pigeon correction, Dionysius says, adjusting the basin. By midday, you're helping organize the hourly decree archive, which stores all imperial edicts that were time-sensitive, some dangerously so. One scroll reads, at the 7th hour of the 10th day, all spoons used in ceremonial broth stirring must be turned clockwise. No explanation, just a firm command. Another decree mandates that merchants must close their stalls precisely at the fading of the 3rd candle on feast days. There's a note beside it, too ambiguous. Recommends standardizing candle thickness. One especially confusing document orders that all court proceedings be paused during eclipses, unless the defendant is from Thessaloniki, in which case, proceed with caution. You take a break near the sundial garden, where junior scribes are drawing the sun's shadow across a grid. It's peaceful in a slightly neurotic way. Nikitas joins you, sipping from a cup of lukewarm barley tea. Most people think the emperor runs the empire, he says, but really it's Dionysius and his sundial. And it's true. In Byzantium, bureaucratic timekeeping wasn't just about clocks. It was power. Whoever controlled time controlled the rhythms of prayers, markets, tax deadlines, and marriage ceremonies, which, by the way, also had strict time guidelines. You come across a directive that states all weddings must begin between the sounding of the 9th bell and the cooling of the soup. Apparently, someone's nuptials once started early and were declared void. Late in the afternoon, Dionysios tasks you with updating the lunar clock record, used to predict religious feasts, eclipses, and the availability of certain eels. Yes, eels. Nikitas shrugs. Some fishermen swear they only appear on odd lunar Tuesdays. We don't argue. The chart looks like a dizzying spiral of moons, numbers, and letters. You're told to mark any upcoming months where feast days coincide with known wine shortages. We don't want too many pious citizens drinking vinegar, Dionysios says, entirely serious. One last task before evening, writing the notice of adjusted sunrise for the imperial bulletin board. Apparently, due to cloud interference and imperial bathhouse steam, today's official sunrise was moved 7 minutes later than anticipated. Your announcement reads, "Let it be known, On this 15th day, the sun emerged not at its expected hour, but fashionably late. All records shall reflect this celestial modesty. You pin it to the bulletin wall beside a faded notice about goat theft prevention. The air smells of wax and damp parchment as the final bell rings, a slightly flat tone caused by someone leaning on the rope too hard. You return to your quarters with a new appreciation for the exhausting beauty of bureaucratic time. Every moment is recorded, debated, adjusted, and sometimes completely ignored. But at least now you know why no one in Byzantium ever arrives on time. Reading in a warm, immersive storytelling tone, building toward a playful yet poignant climax. You've barely managed to get your tunic on when Nikitas taps on your chamber door with the flat end of a stylus. "Hope you're in the mood for food," he says, already munching on a sesame cake. "We're heading to the Bureau of Imperial Provisions." Your stomach growls in agreement. The Bureau of Imperial Provisions is nestled behind the eastern wing of the palace, close enough to the sea to smell the salt, but not close enough to be fashionable. It's a sprawling series of cool stone storerooms, vaulted halls, and slightly nervous goats. As you enter, the air thickens with 1,000 competing scents: honeyed pastries, pickled fish, overripe figs, saffron, damp burlap, and something suspiciously cheese-adjacent that Nikitas identifies as aged camel curd. You decide not to ask further questions. "Today," Nikitas says, handing you a wax tablet, "you're tracking the imperial lunch inventory. Nothing major, just make sure no one steals the lemons." You blink. "Lemons? Very political," he says. "You wouldn't believe the citrus drama." You begin in the preservation vault, a cool, dark chamber where Byzantine ingenuity truly shines. You find rows of amphorae sealed with wax, some filled with grape molasses, others with preserved apricots swimming in rosewater. There are garum jars, Byzantium's nod to Roman fish sauce, but also pickled turnips labeled "Do not open without permission of the vinegar clerk." One clerk, with the poise of someone who's definitely named more than 3 types of garlic, explains that the emperor prefers his lentils with a hint of wild thyme and emotional distance. You nod solemnly and scribble it down. Historians still debate how accurate Byzantine recipe records were, since many included vague directions like "cook until honorable" or "season like your aunt would." One preserved note describes a sauce that should be stirred until it remembers your father's warnings. Your next stop is the bread hall, where massive loaves of leavened wheat bread are stacked like architectural blueprints. The empire distributed bread to soldiers, monks, and bureaucrats like you. And yes, even the bread had an inspector. You meet her, an elderly woman named Cassian, who sniffs each loaf with the precision of a bloodhound and occasionally slaps one for being overambitious. She lets you taste a fresh slice. It's slightly sweet, speckled with anise, and just warm enough to be comforting. You make a note, request more reasons to visit Bread Hall. Later in the meat wing, you discover that the palace maintained a strict meat schedule. Mondays and Wednesdays were mostly vegetarian, Fridays for fish, and Sundays were reserved for peacocks and other display birds that had died of natural haughtiness. You pass by a table where a scribe is carving telemarks onto chicken bones, each one representing meals prepared for dignitaries. One column is labeled simply "Too many dishes." Another says 3 eels, 2 regrets. You help inventory a batch of cheese wheels from Anatolia, each stamped with a seal that reads "Inspected by the Brotherhood of the Right." Nikitas nudges you. "Don't joke about that name, they're sensitive." The warehouse buzzes with tension over the upcoming Feast of St. Basil, a major logistical undertaking requiring rare spices, fresh almonds, and someone willing to milk 5 goats an hour before dawn. You're shown the Imperial Spice Cabinet, a reinforced chest under lock and key. It holds cinnamon bark, cardamom pods, peppercorns from India, and a scroll with the emergency nutmeg reserve count. A guard stands watch. One time, Nikitas whispers, a clerk used too much clove. A poet fainted. You end your shift assisting the tea mistress, a woman named Thalassa who brews concoctions for everyone from emperors to janitors. She lets you try a blend of mint, lemon peel, and barley steeped in copper kettles. It tastes like the memory of spring and a hint of administrative patience. She tells you a story about an official once reprimanded for oversteeping his tea during Lent. He insisted it was spiritual contemplation. The patriarch called it vanity in liquid form. By twilight, you're finishing paperwork for the day's rations, using terms like sauce variants and missing olives unaccounted for. You're told to mark any food deemed emotionally complex, which includes one pomegranate that allegedly made a eunuch weep. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine court's obsession with detail stemmed from genuine culinary standards or just a deep, ancestral fear of running out of figs during a council meeting. You walk back to your chamber under the soft orange sky, smelling faintly of flour, vinegar, and thyme. You've learned something crucial. Food in Byzantium wasn't just nourishment, it was theater, diplomacy, religion, and a full-time accounting nightmare. Nikitas tosses you a date-stuffed fig as he disappears into the hallway. You bite in. It's sweet, sticky, and mildly overcooked. But in that moment, it tastes like you belong. Would you like delivered in a richly expressive tone with a touch of dry humor, gradually building to a whimsical and heartfelt conclusion. You wake with the distinct impression that someone is watching you, and in true Byzantine fashion, they are, through a peephole in the linen closet. Time to visit the Department of Decorative Titles, Nikitas announces, appearing beside your bed like an apparition in yesterday's socks. The Emperor just added 3 more words to his job description, and someone has to document the implications. As you pull on your robe, he tosses you a scroll. Start memorizing. By lunchtime, you'll be able to list 15 forms of glorified job inflation. The Department of Decorative Titles is located in a long marble hall lined with framed parchments, each bearing increasingly Baroque honorifics in gold ink. One plaque reads, "Most serene, God-crowned, victory-loving, defender of the holy spatula." You're not entirely sure if that last part is metaphorical. Nikitas leads you to a round table where 4 scribes are locked in polite but deadly semantic warfare over whether sublime commander of the leftmost gate outranks lofty watcher of the 6th spoon. Titles, he whispers, are Byzantium's real currency, and nobody wants to be the official of the 3rd best something. Your task today? Assist in revising the upcoming roster of annual title revisions. This 200-scroll monstrosity records every bureaucrat's title change over the past year. Some demoted, some promoted, many just embellished. One man, formerly known as the notary of the 2nd chest room, has been renamed the Blessed Warden of the East-Northeast Sanctum. It's the same room, but now he gets a tassel. You ask a nearby clerk why titles are so obsessively modified. She shrugs. Morale, bragging rights. Also, some nobles bet on them. Historians still argue whether Byzantine decorative titles held actual authority or simply served as elaborate distractions. Some emperors handed them out like candy, others withheld them like a grumpy dungeon master managing prestige points. The ranking system is bewildering. There are dukes who aren't really dukes, counts of imaginary provinces, and an entire folder devoted to ephemeral titles. Temporary ranks given during festivals or when someone donated a particularly good batch of wine. You're assigned to copy the title supplement for feasting seasons, which includes such gems as Taster-in-Chief of the leftmost roast, holder of the sacred napkin, assistant oiler of the royal beard. Each comes with a tiny silver pin and, allegedly, 3 days of bragging rights. Nikitas shows you his own old title, Sub-Auxiliary Scribe of Golden Border Margins. You laugh, but he just sighs. I miss the margins, cleaner work. You're then dragged into a tense meeting regarding the sudden vacancy of the Lord of Polite Clapping, whose retirement has caused panic at the upcoming imperial performance of a very long, very slow flute ballad. 3 candidates vie for the honor, including a man who once clapped for 37 minutes uninterrupted. Meanwhile, a new proposal for the title Vice Deputy of Ecclesiastical Drapery Coordination sparks a heated argument over textile jurisdiction. You're asked to take minutes but end up doodling a crown with legs. Later in the day, you help prepare a ceremonial title acceptance oath, a florid document written in purple ink and perfumed with frankincense. It requires the new appointee to swear, among other things, to defend the honor of his title with impeccable posture and decent handwriting. You meet one such honoree, a former goat tax collector, now appointed as regal auditor of hoofed livestock-related taxation affairs. He wears a dazed expression and clutches a scroll like it might vanish if he blinks. Before leaving, Nikitas invites you to peek inside the vault of unused titles.
a restricted room holding centuries' worth of titles that were proposed but never granted. Among them, saffron overseer of mild dishes, listener in waiting for the royal whispers, bearer of the occasionally important fork. Some are marked with red ink, too dramatic, rejected by patriarch, or simply emperor sneezed, decision voided. By sunset, you find yourself oddly moved. Behind the satire, the layers of meaning and self-importance lies something tender. These titles, absurd, poetic, or pompous, were part of a vast, careful dance that kept this empire from unraveling. You return to your room, clutching a parchment with your temporary title, Shadow Assistant to the Observer of Observers. Nikitas made it up, but you stick it above your bed anyway. Because here in Byzantium, even your bedtime self deserves a little bureaucratic grandeur. Delivered in a measured, immersive tone, balancing intrigue, dry humor, and reflective wonder, building toward a quiet, meaningful close. The morning air is cooler than usual, and the city has a peculiar quietness to it, the kind you associate with days when nothing particularly important is supposed to happen. But of course, you are in Byzantium, where the concept of nothing happening is nothing more than a polite fiction. Today's mission is simple. Nikitas announces as he greets you at the door, his face unusually grim. We're visiting the Imperial Seal Library. Don't ask too many questions. Why, you ask, adjusting your sandals. He hesitates, then grins, because nothing's ever as simple as it seems. The Imperial Seal Library is tucked away in the southernmost wing of the palace. A tall, narrow tower, spare in decoration but heavy with the scent of wax, ink, and mystery. Rows of ancient shelves line the walls. Behind each shelf sits a clerk who watches you like a hawk. They aren't rude, but they don't exactly smile either. You can't tell if they're waiting for a mistake or just trying to stay awake. It's probably both. You see, Nikitas explains, the Imperial Seal Library holds every seal ever created for the Emperor, and trust me, there's a lot. You walk through the aisles, observing the elaborate designs etched into the seals. Golden eagles, intricate patterns, cryptic symbols. Some are so detailed it would take a craftsman weeks to engrave just one. A clerk hands you a wax tablet. Here, look through this, he mutters, adjusting his spectacles. It's the most recent seal. The Emperor of many titles insisted it be made in a hurry. Didn't quite match his expectations, so he had a dozen more made, just in case. There's always more. The seals are impressive, yes, but it's hard to shake the feeling that you've stumbled into a bureaucratic abyss where titles, symbols, and authority never quite meet. You flip through more documents. The Emperor's seal of eternal gratitude to the Ambassador of Lands. The seal of uninterrupted discussions regarding Byzantium's breadbasket. You start to wonder how these little discs of wax and gold could hold so much power in such a sprawling empire. But Nikitas seems to be losing interest. If I'm being honest, he says, yawning, I think they just keep making seals to avoid actually solving problems. Each new seal just gives people something else to argue about. Historians still debate the purpose of the imperial seal system. Some say it was meant to emphasize the emperor's omnipotence. Others believe it was a beautifully executed distraction, a kind of imperial sleight of hand to keep courtiers too busy to stage rebellions. Either way, the seals are mesmerizing. You wander deeper into the library and find a particularly odd collection. Seals made for lesser officials of the empire. One is labeled Patron of the Evening Candles. It depicts a crescent moon surrounded by a halo of fireflies. You glance up at Nikitas, who's scribbling in his notebook. I guess everyone needs a title, he shrugs, even the candles. You suppress a chuckle. There's something undeniably humorous about the idea that somewhere a man carries the official title of Overseer of Dim Light Sources. It's hard to imagine how that conversation goes at dinner. But as the hours pass, something strange happens. Despite the endless repetition of titles and seals, something beautiful emerges. The sheer dedication to order, even in something as small as a wax imprint, reflects a larger need for harmony in a vast, fractured empire. No matter how minor or absurd, each seal is a thread in the grand tapestry of Byzantium. A carefully crafted system where even the smallest detail could carry the weight of centuries. At some point, you find yourself facing the Emperor's Seal of Silence, a heavy, dark wax stamp depicting an empty throne. It's striking in its simplicity, a stark contrast to the overwhelming intricacy of the others.
Nikitas gestures to it like an old friend. Ah, that one, he says with quiet reverence. That's the one you use when nothing needs to be said. You wonder how many people in Byzantium ever got to use it. The day wears on, the library remains eerily quiet, and you can't help but feel that even the seals themselves, these tiny stamped artifacts, have stories to tell. They hold history, memory, hope, authority. It's as if each seal bears the ghost of a decision, a whispered command from an empire trying to keep itself from falling apart. As the final bell tolls, signaling the library's closure, Nikitas leans toward you with a wry smile. Ready to go? I think I saw a seal of fruit preservation waiting for us in the corner. You smile. Sure, why not? I could use a little more mystery in my life. And as you step back into the sunlight, the strange, waxy world of Byzantine seals still lingers in your mind. You wonder, maybe the world would be better if everyone had a title, no matter how trivial, just to make life feel a little more official. Delivered with a tone that blends subtle satire and historical wonder, channeling the dry humor and weighty reflection of life inside a labyrinthine empire. The next day, as you step out into the warm morning air, the city greets you with its usual harmony. Horses clip-clop down cobbled streets, the scent of bread baking and incense burning drifts through alleyways, and the occasional shout of a street vendor punctuates the calm. But today, there's something different. A hum of anticipation buzzes beneath the surface. Nikitas looks over his shoulder with that familiar, amused smile. Today, he says, we're heading to the Imperial Red Tape Archive. You blink. Red tape? Don't ask, he replies. Trust me, it's more exciting than it sounds. The archive is housed in an unassuming stone building near the Palace District, simple on the outside, but inside, it's exactly what you'd expect. Rows of towering shelves, leather-bound volumes, meticulously rolled scrolls, and an unnervingly large collection of ink pots, quills, and bored clerks. The air is thick with the scent of parchment, dust, and decisions no one wanted to make. Nikitas leads you through a maze of files, each labeled with the kind of Byzantine jargon that would make a philosopher weep. You pick up one. Regulations regarding the consumption of goldfish in the imperial court. It's exactly what it sounds like. A series of elaborate policies on the proper etiquette for dining with ornamental fish during formal dinners. Nikitas murmurs almost reverently, "Ah, the Red Tape Archive. This is where all the things that never really mattered still had to be written down." He gestures grandly. Think of it as a historical landfill for ideas, laws, and decrees that no one had the energy to fight over. Everything had to be decided, just not too loudly. You scan some of the surrounding documents, the correct number of official umbrellas for imperial parades, arrangement of pillows on the emperor's throne revised for lumbar comfort, string knot protocol for winter footwear of senior courtiers. You're beginning to see the picture. A clerk, an older man with spectacles and a mournful mustache, shuffles by holding a bundle of parchment labeled the proper number of trumpets for different royal occasions. You turn to Nikitas. I thought the Byzantines had their priorities straight. He gives you that look again. The empire was more about symbols than substance, he says. Everything had to be just so. There was no room for chaos, even if it meant drowning in scrolls. The deeper you go, the heavier the air becomes. It's as though the sheer weight of unnecessary decision-making is pressing down on your shoulders. Here, in this paper-laced labyrinth, you see the empire laid bare, not through its wars or triumphs, but through its excessive dedication to order. You're handed a scroll by a passing clerk. Feasts for imperially indifferent seasons. This one's a classic, he says. The emperor needed something to do between more important feasts, so we invented middle-tier meals for his midweek hunger pangs. No one knew what to call them, so they created a whole new category of ceremonial food. Nikitas scans it, smiling faintly. Ah, the Monday breakfast banquet. That one's famous. They had to decide which pastries were fit for Tuesdays and which ones were better suited to Saturday morning laziness. You shake your head. What happened to all this? Nikitas shrugs. Some of it stuck. Some of it vanished. Most of it stayed here, waiting for someone to unearth it and say, look at this nonsense we once took seriously. Historians still argue about it. Was this obsession with bureaucracy a symbol of the empire's enduring stability or its slow, bureaucratic demise? On one hand, every detail mattered. Even the shade of the emperor's cloak had a name. Even the height of the throne was debated. On the other hand, how long can an empire last when it takes 12 officials to decide how many tassels belong on a curtain? You pick up more scrolls, tax exemptions for imperial pet eunuchs, official limits on peacock feather offerings during royal birthdays, guidelines on ceremonial towel counts for imperial bath rituals. I think we've reached the end of civilization, you mutter. But Nikitas doesn't seem to mind. He flips through a decree about seasonal curtain color changes in size. These aren't important, not really, but they're part of the empire's story. And suddenly you understand. This isn't just a collection of absurdity. It's a record of a civilization trying, desperately, to impose order on chaos. To believe that if everything had a rule, a seal, a title, then maybe the world could be controlled. Maybe the empire could endure just a little longer. You run your hand across an oddly shaped wax seal, the symbol almost worn away by time. Nikitas places a hand on your shoulder. Time to go, he says gently. You glance around one last time. The shelves stretch endlessly into the gloom, a silent testament to the belief that everything, no matter how small, deserved a label, a protocol, a scroll. And as you step outside, the warm light of the sun hitting your face, you realize Byzantium, in all its strange, absurd glory, was built not just by emperors and soldiers, but by clerks, scribes, and red tape archivists who believed that even the most forgettable details mattered, delivering a satirical, reflective voiceover, combining humor and history as you explore the Byzantine world of ceremonial honors. The next morning, you find yourself lost in thought, reflecting on the strange, intricate world of Byzantine bureaucracy. It's a world where even the smallest detail could mean the difference between success and failure, and where every ritual, every rule seemed to matter, even if no one could quite remember why. Nikitas, ever the pragmatist, doesn't care much for the why, it's the how that interests him. Today, he announces, we're off to the Court of Imperial Honors. There, you'll see what happens when things get so ceremonial that no one even remembers why they were invented in the first place. You raise an eyebrow. Like those Monday breakfast banquets? He grins, humor twinkling in his eyes. Exactly. The Court of Imperial Honors, where receiving an honor becomes an honor in itself. It's a place where titles and medals multiply faster than we can count. The Court of Imperial Honors sits in a regal wing of the palace, a quiet sanctuary away from the chaos of bureaucratic life. You step into a grand hall where every surface is polished, every column is carved, and every banner bears the insignia of some forgotten emperor. You almost expect trumpets to play, but all you hear is the shuffle of sandals and the murmurs of officials discussing nothing, really. Nikitas leads you through the hall, past gleaming displays of imperial honorary medals. Each one is a masterpiece, intricately designed, sparkling with gold and precious stones. But the question nags at you. What did these medals actually mean? Nikitas waves his hand over the collection. This, he says, is where things get excessive. The medals here are awarded for, well, anything. Showing up at the right place, at the right time. Not rocking the boat, wearing the right clothes to the right party. You glance around. One medal is shaped like a tiny imperial crown, another a simple golden laurel. Some are so elaborate they seem less like awards and more like pieces of jewelry. You can almost feel the weight of each one, the stories of emperors long gone and the silent competition among those who wore them. Nikitas stops before one of the most impressive collections, the Medal of Eternal Allegiance. A glittering thing, a symbol of loyalty awarded to those who'd served the emperor, without question, without fail, for decades. The first one, legend says, was given to a general who'd followed the emperor's orders even when those orders were less than sensible. Nikitas murmurs, you see, the idea was to reward loyalty, blind loyalty, not how well you did your job, not how smart you were. It was about doing it without asking questions, showing allegiance no matter the cost. You shake your head in disbelief. So they awarded people for just doing what they were told, no matter how foolish it was? Nikitas shrugs. That's Byzantium for you. It wasn't about being the best. It was about staying in line. The rewards were nice, but the real prize was staying in favor. You begin to wonder how many Byzantines spent their entire lives not trying to be great, but simply trying to stay in favor with the emperor. Historians still debate whether these medals were a symbol of imperial power or an acknowledgement of the quiet work behind the scenes, those whose loyalty helped maintain the empire's machinery. As you walk deeper into the Court of Imperial Honors, you come across something even stranger, the Medal of Confused Service, a small, modest pin, nearly lost among the more dazzling awards. You ask a nearby clerk about it. "Ah," he says with a knowing nod, "that one's for people who didn't quite get the Emperor's instructions, but still managed to do something useful. It's awarded to those who, despite their creative misunderstandings, managed to stay in favor." You can't help but laugh. It's the kind of medal anyone could win, yet somehow it carries its own dignity. For those who tried, failed, and still succeeded. Nikitas points out another strange medal, the Medal of Unusual Wisdom. Awarded to scholars and advisors, its inscription is in both Greek and Latin, the languages of the empire's two great intellectual traditions. What's odd about this one, Nikitas says, is that it's given to those whose advice was never actually followed, but whose advice in hindsight was often spot on. You raise an eyebrow. So it's for people who were right, but no one listened? Exactly, Nikita smirks. A very Byzantine thing, don't you think? They get the medal for being right, but never the satisfaction of actually being listened to. You can't help but wonder how many Byzantines spent their lives giving advice that was never heard, never appreciated. How many had medals on their walls gathering dust for words that shaped the empire, even if no one ever listened at the time? As you leave the Court of Imperial Honors, the weight of all those medals lingers in your mind. These honors weren't about achievement. They were about something else. Recognition. The desire to be seen, validated, and to be part of something larger than oneself. You look over at Nikitas. "So what do you think all these medals really meant?" He grins. "I think they meant the emperor never had enough praise." You laugh softly, and together you leave the Court of Imperial Honors. Its medals, with all their pomp and circumstance, weighing on your mind long after you've gone. Script for voiceover with reflective and humorous tones, capturing the peculiar nature of Byzantine life. As the sun sets over the ancient city of Constantinople,
Painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, you and Nikitas make your way to the halls of the Imperial Archivists, the final stop on this journey through the strange corridors of Byzantine life. The city's golden rooftops gleam in the fading light, and the cool evening breeze carries the sense of roasting meats and incense. The marketplace's bustle is giving way to the quieter, more deliberate rhythm of evening. Nikitas looks thoughtful as he speaks. "Tonight, we're finishing with something different," he says. "Here, we'll see the other side of Byzantine bureaucracy, the more forgotten parts." You exchange a curious glance. The halls of the Imperial Archivists are tucked away at the edge of the palace complex, far from the high ceremonies of the Imperial Honors Court or the dusty bureaucracy of the red tape archive. As you step inside, you're greeted by rows upon rows of ancient manuscripts and scrolls, stacked high and haphazardly on shelves. This is a place where the forgotten stories of the Empire are kept, their fates sealed in ink. Nikitas leads you past shelves that smell faintly of old parchment, the air thick with the weight of forgotten history. "These," he says softly, "are the true relics of Byzantium, the things that didn't make it into the history books. The documents that were deemed unnecessary, irrelevant, or just too strange to survive." You run your fingers over a scroll with a curious label, the official imperial opinions on garden gnomes. It's as bizarre as it sounds, a treatise on the decorative use of small statues in the emperor's gardens, detailing the proper placement of gnomes and acceptable materials for their construction. "Garden gnome?" you ask, voice tinged with disbelief. Nikitas chuckles. "Yes, garden gnomes. The emperor had quite the obsession with them. He even ordered a great debate about which color of gnome was most auspicious for attracting good luck. These were the kinds of things debated in the courts of Byzantium, absurd but important at the time." You glance around again, noticing that many of the scrolls are filled with decisions on seemingly irrelevant things. rules for imperial pets, decrees on the type of clothing worn to ceremonial bathhouses, and long-winded instructions on how to walk in the presence of the emperor without offending his sensibilities. The archivists themselves don't seem concerned with preserving what others might call the important parts of history. They dust off the scrolls, make quiet notations in large ledgers, and carefully maintain the odd remnants of imperial life, as if these fragments somehow matter just as much. Nikidus leads you to a table where an archivist is unrolling an ancient, cracked scroll. He studies it for a moment before gesturing for you to come closer. You lean in and read the title with wide eyes, Official Rules for the Imperial Nap Time. You laugh. Nap time? That was a thing? Oh, definitely, Nikita says, clearly enjoying your surprise. You'd be surprised at what had to be legislated.
The emperor believed that a well-rested ruler was a strong ruler. So, naturally, an official policy was made about the proper nap times for the emperor and his inner circle. The scroll details the exact amount of time to be allotted for naps every afternoon. It also specifies under what conditions naps could be interrupted and the appropriate gongs and incense to be used during naptime rituals. I guess the emperor wasn't keen on being disturbed while he rested, you muse, raising an eyebrow. You'd be surprised. Nikitas replies, a nap was a powerful thing in the Byzantine world. It was seen as a way to recharge both physically and mentally. So official decree was made. Every afternoon, the emperor must rest for exactly 33 minutes. No more, no less. If anyone disturbed his rest, they could be severely reprimanded. You take in the absurdity of it all. The sheer dedication to the minutiae of life, the unwavering belief that every detail mattered. Even something as simple as sleep was to be managed with military precision. The contrast between the grandeur of Byzantine life and the peculiar details of its everyday rituals strikes you again. It's a strange reminder of the contradictions that made the empire both endlessly fascinating and ultimately unsustainable. Nikitas sighs softly, and you look over at him, wondering what's on his mind. You know, he says quietly, in some ways, the Byzantine Empire was a lot like the scrolls we're looking at now. It's a fascinating mess of contradictions, grand ideas, ridiculous details, and a whole lot of people working hard to keep things running, even when they made no sense. You look around at the archivists, their quiet work a testament to this idea. Their job isn't just to preserve the grand moments of empire, it's to hold on to the bizarre, the unnecessary, the strange things people once thought important. There's something soothing in the thought that even in a world filled with emperors and wars, the little oddities are preserved too. As you leave the halls of the imperial archivists, the sky outside has turned dark, the stars twinkling above the city. You think back over the journey you've just taken, the strange and convoluted road of Byzantine bureaucracy, the endless rules, the obsession with order, and the weird ceremonies that defined a civilization. It's been a strange ride, but somehow it feels like you've caught a glimpse into the soul of an empire. Not just in the grand battles or moments, but in the quiet, sometimes ridiculous rituals that made up everyday life. You glance at Nikitas one last time as you walk into the night. What do you think all this really means? He smiles faintly. Maybe it just means that nothing, no matter how small or insignificant, should ever be forgotten. It's all a part of history, no matter how bizarre. You nod, taking in the sounds of the city, now quiet and peaceful. In this moment, you can almost hear the echoes of the Byzantines themselves, their voices and rituals still lingering in the air, whispering the stories of an empire that lived by the smallest of details. And with that, the journey through Byzantine history, through its strange labyrinth of bureaucracy and ceremony, finally winds to a close. Now it's time to let go of all those strange forgotten scrolls and drift into a peaceful rest. Would you like to continue developing this into a full script, or perhaps adjust the tone for a different type of project?